They said one thing that comes up around survivors of sexual abuse is someone I was talking to about their experiences as a child. It says one thing that comes up around survivors of sexual abuse is the theology that surrounds our bodies and our sexuality. Is there a way to understand who owns our bodies with respect to autonomy and consent? Like, where is that line? For some of us, the idea that our bodies are not our own, which I think is in Corinthians, Paul talks about that, says, is played out in weird ways because of our experience. Likewise, an emphasis on virginity as a virtue. So kind of how would this idea of your body not being your own and virginity being held up as a virtue, how does that, we see that playing into affecting those who have struggled with the sexual
Because when our bodies are not our own, it's not that they're someone else's, it's that they're God's. And I think to sin sexually against someone, especially in the case of sexual abuse survivors, you're not just sinning against someone, although you are sinning against someone, and God will hold you accountable for that. But you're violating the imago Dei, the image of God, in a very, very perverse, bordering on blasphemous way. And I think the judgment that person is heaping up upon themselves is not something I want to think about. But so for the survivor, I say you have a very just God, a very powerful God, who is angered by that in ways that you cannot comprehend, and he loves the victim, he loves the downtrodden, and he's on your side. And that's really bad news for the person who did that to you.
I also think this. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Mark.
No, I'm still kind of looking good.
Okay, I think this sort of falls in the same line as. So there's a lot of splits I would like to make in these questions. First off, my heart goes out to whoever you were talking to. This is sort of goes along with the death question of we walk on eggshells around this for a good reason, but it's sort of the same line I get when people say, "Well, I don't like calling God Father because my dad beat me." It's like, well, so we need to separate that out from the whole thing of our bodies being our own, and that when Christianity, I'm going to say Christianity as a whole, I'm not trying to speak for all of us, but I want to say that I'm pretty sure we would all agree, when we're referencing Paul or saying our bodies are not our own, we are in no way advocating that means someone can mistreat your body. We are advocating a higher view of you are in the image of God, and God, who is a good Father, will have good works for you in your body. All of us. The other thing I would split out from that is not to connect someone who has been sexually harassed, sexually mistreated, sexually abused, sexually anything, with the same virtue of virginity. No theologian, pastor, Christian, in my presence or worth their salt would ever, should ever make the connection that if you are in any way sexually anything, that is the same as someone freely giving up their virginity.
Right.
That is not the same. That's not even the same sport. I'm not even going to say the same ball. That's not, we're talking football and baseball. Like, those aren't even the same rules. When we hold up virginity as a virtue, it's because we feel and we trust that what God says is for our good. Right? All these rules, and I mean, even in Leviticus, like, that's a tough thing, but honor your parents so that your days may be long. God wants us to do things because it's for our good. Stay a virgin because when you marry your husband, you become one flesh. It's for your good that you do that, right? It's not because we're trying to be Mr. Mean and say that that's bad and all that. No, it's that the truth is that in the confines of a marriage between a man and a woman, that is where that holy, may I say, holy and special thing should take place, because it's for your good. It's not because it's for your bad or because we're trying to put borders around. But in no way would I ever want to say or make the claim that holding virginity up as a virtue is me saying, but you were sexually assaulted,
Right.
and so you're no longer a virgin. No, I would never make that claim.
We're talking about a ultimately spiritual union that represents Christ in the church.
That's right, and that is something completely separate than someone being violated in the most sincere and inner way that
Yeah.
anyone could ever be violated.
Right.
I mean, even Paul separates sexual sin out, right? Because
Yeah.
why? That sin you do amongst yourself. I mean, there is something so profoundly violated. Back to America and our laws, sexual sins are set apart. They're not just put in there with robbing the convenience store because they're so atrocious. But I would say that, the owning our own body, our bodies are not ourselves. Also, that's, and I can see where that would
You
hit
want me
you
to read the
bad.
passage?
Yeah.
Yes. Read the passage.
Okay, and it's in 1 Corinthians 5, I believe, and it's talking about marriage. Where did it? Oh, I lost it. Oh no, I lost it. I'm sorry. Keep talking. I lost it.
No, I mean, I was finishing. I was just saying that's a twist.
Right.
That's a twist of God's goodness to say that our bodies are not our own and connect that as well to sexual assault. That's
Right.
That's not what
Here we go.
mean.
It's 1 Corinthians 7, starting in verse, say 2. Nevertheless, because of immorality, let each man have his own wife, let each woman have her own husband. Verse 3, let the husband render to his wife of the affection that is due her, and likewise also the wife to her husband. The wife does not have authority over her own body, but the husband does, and likewise the husband does not have authority over his own body, but the wife does. Do not deprive one another, except with consent for a time, that you may give yourselves to fasting and prayer. Come together again so that Satan does not tempt you because of your lack of self-control. The idea, and essentially that what I see happening, and someone who has experienced that kind of trauma,
Right.
I really think that, it's so impactful that it is going to be a filter through which they'll see everything. And so they'll see, someone could see a verse like this, and it says, oh, my body's not my own. And that's being accepted through this filter of what happened to them. Whereas all this is saying is, within your marriage to become one flesh, don't use that part of your marriage as a weapon. Don't use that as a control thing. Don't let that be something that, it's like, that's something you need to let be a good part of your marriage, right? Don't be denying each other that. That's not saying, well, they can just do whatever they want with you.
Absolutely.
No, because there's also things where it says, husband, Ephesians 5, husbands love your wives.
As
As Christ loved the church. Well, let's, how did Christ love the church? Sacrificially. So there's absolutely nothing about the marriage relationship that would say, you don't get to control what happens to you and when or how. No, the husband's actually being told to respect you. And so, and to love you and care for you in that. And I think in the same way, the thing about virginity is it gets skewed. And unfortunately, there are people who flat out will teach complete, twisted, corrupt nonsense. That is, oh, well, you're no longer a virgin. Well, you're just a filthy, dirty,
Right.
There's a video, and I saw this, and Matt Chandler, he's a preacher up in Dallas, tells a story about whenever he was back in college, goes to this event, and the guy's illustration, it's one of these, save yourself for marriage kind of talks. And the guy takes a rose and shows how beautiful and lovely it is, and he kind of tells everybody to kind of pass around and smell it and, check it out and look at it. And by the end of his talk, he asks for his rose back, and by the time he gets it, petals are broken off and the leaves all whatever, and it's like all mangled because it's been handled by, the whole audience. And he's like, who would want this? Kind of a thing, showing that, that this is you whenever you give yourself away, that you're dirty and broken and trash. And it's like, no, absolutely not. Because what the message that someone receives who, they got handled and mistreated, not of their own, volition, they see that and go, well, that's what I am. That's who I am. And so they're taking this message in, and it's like, no, like he said, the person who just willfully, just flagrantly says, forget you, God, I don't care what you say, and just willingly runs into sin, is not someone who has been, had that stolen, where they're they are the one who has been mistreated. There's no, where it's like, they're not looked at as the one where it's like, well, you're dirty now. No, you're someone to be shown love and compassion and kindness and grace and mercy. That person who did that to you is the one who's filthy, right? That the person who did that to you, they're the one. If anyone needs to be viewed with scorn and derision, it's them. And so,
right, but even in your example, it's like, I would never even tell someone who wasn't a virgin that there's no
right,
redemptive aspect that God can do in their life. That's
absolutely.
Because it's hard. It's a tough conversation, and I don't. It's tough not to get too adulty, and you don't want to. But sex is the ultimate image of the church. Christ gave Himself up for the church, and so we give ourselves up for Him, and we are one body. That is marriage. That's what Paul says. Husbands, give yourself up. Wives, give yourself up. You become one flesh. I mean, that's the beauty of it. That's the beauty of it, and it's just twisted especially in our society, where sex is just so twisted, and marriage is so twisted. Human sexuality is so twisted. What's another one?
Everything's so twisted.
sad.
We're
I
a broken,
just
fallen
laugh.
people. We twist everything. So, I can see how people would receive messages whenever you're only seeing it through that filter and that lens of pain.
Yeah.
It's like if you have a water, and you got a stick going into the water, under the water, it's skewed, right? It's going in straight, but then an optical illusion. Once it hits the water, it's going at a weird angle. And I think the same thing, whenever people have this lens of the pain and the trauma they've received, that, even a correctly spoken doctrine, they receive it, but seen through the lens of their pain, it's skewed, and they don't see it correctly. And then they internalize that, and then more pain.